There's a lot of misconception out there, and it's driven by incomplete information. There's a lot of question about how much does an ADU cost? And you can quote that a bunch of different ways. You can think about that as just the box, or the box and the foundation, or the box and the foundation and the design, or the box and the box and the foundation, the design and the permitting, or the site work, or there's just sort of a million places you can cut that off.
Welcome to Business Ninjas, brought to you by WriteForMe, where you'll hear from business leaders who are out there growing their business and slaying it every day. Learn from the masters. Let's get started.
Hey everybody, welcome back for another episode of Business Ninjas. I'm here today with Stan Acton. He's the founder and CEO at Acton ADU. Stan, welcome to the show.
Thanks so much for having me. This is great.
Yeah, excited to have you. So Stan, why don't you start and tell us a little bit about yourself?
So my formal education was computer science, and after 4 years in high tech, I wanted to go back to my roots and be a carpenter. And so about 35 years ago, I got out of high tech, picked up my bags again, and after a year of working for someone, they ran out of work, and I formed my own company. And that's it's been a fantastic experience ever since.
That's fantastic. So tell me a little bit more about Acton ADU and how you got started.
Yeah, so back in 2017, Governor Brown passed legislation that empowered beginning of 2018 for people to begin to build ADUs. And I had always wanted to be somewhat more of a specialist, and I'd always been very inspired by small architecture. And one morning, all of these factors came together, and I just thought, you know what, that's what I want to do. And the bonuses is that we get to provide housing instead of just prettier kitchens, and it's just been a really synergistic decision. It's been a super exciting decision to have made.
That's great. And for those of our listeners who may not know what an ADU is, can you explain a little bit about what that is?
Absolutely. It stands for Accessory Dwelling Unit. And essentially, it is a fully equipped small house. It's got a kitchen, it's got a bathroom, it's got a sleeping area, it's got storage, and it's generally detached from the main house, but sometimes it's attached. But it's a small house for people.
That's fantastic. That's really interesting. So, when you're talking about your clients, do you tend to see trends in ages of your clients, size of the ADU they're looking to build, or anything like that?
Yeah, absolutely. We absolutely do. When we first started this, we thought everybody was going to want to build this for investment purposes. But what we've really found is that it's really meeting a family need, whether it is for aging parents, or for boomerang kids, or for visiting parents that come from overseas. It seems to be that a really significant solution that ADUs provide is housing for family.
That's obviously I can imagine that's a fantastic, I don't want to necessarily call it a service, but, something that you're able to provide to these families, like you said, for aging populations. I love the term for boomerang kids. That's a very kind way of putting it. I think that's fantastic as a way to provide that additional support and kind of giving them a little bit of the autonomy with still the support of being, close to the main house, I imagine.
Yeah, we hear a lot. We hear the same quote over and over again. Well, we want to have them close, but not that close. Right.
Yeah.
And so yeah,
that's great. So, when we're talking about Acton ADU, what is it that really separates Acton ADU from its competition?
Yeah, that's actually a really good question. And I'm going to take a minute to answer that, because there's sort of several approaches to getting an ADU. There is sort of prefab, where you pour a slab and then you drop an ADU in by a crane. And then there's a traditional build, which is you build it just like you would a small house. And then there are shades of gray in between those. And so from a technology standpoint, we're really more on the traditional build end. And so that isn't necessarily a big differentiator for us. What seems to be the biggest differentiator for us is that we are sort of the one neck to ring solution, in that we do custom builds, but we do the design, we do the permitting, we do the construction, we do the warranty. And having been around for over 30 years, people see that as very valuable. And there are a lot of companies that do this, but most of them, in fact, I don't know of any that sort of have the scope and the reach that we do as a design build company. So there are definitely ADU companies that are bigger than us, that do more ADUs than us. And there are definitely a lot of companies that do design build ADUs. But in terms of building a business that will eventually be statewide around a design build model, I think I'm the only one. We're the only one that I'm really aware of that is doing that.
Hmm. And why is that so important to Acton ADU?
Well, if you take a look at our values and what we feel like we bring to the party, it's an extraordinarily high level of accountability, right? It's start to finish, where we're going to own every aspect of the process, and there's really nobody else to blame. And that's an uncomfortable position to put ourselves in, but it's also really a very comfortable position for me, because I don't like having fingers pointed at me, and I don't really like to point fingers at other people. And so it pretty much lands on us. And I like that.
Yeah, right. No, absolutely. And we talked a little bit, Stan, about the growth that you've seen thus far. And I'm thinking in my head, COVID was a difficult time for a lot of people. The
Yeah.
house that may have been big got very small. So I imagine, did Acton ADU see a lot of growth during that COVID period?
We definitely saw a really high level increase in awareness and demand. So yeah, we did see growth. We saw growth not only in our business, but we also saw an enormous amount of growth in the number of providers in the space. Before COVID, there were maybe a handful of people really pursuing the ADU market. Now there are hundreds.
Hmm. That's, I understand, but then I think it goes back to, Acton ADU's kind of those core principles and core values that really separates you. So that way, when people are looking for, a solution for an ADU, they're able to turn to Acton ADU.
That's what we take a lot of pride in. We're very customer centric.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
And then I want to talk a little bit about growth. You mentioned, when you started this business, kind of getting out of high tech, were there any key milestones or achievements that Acton ADU has reached over the past years where you looked at yourself and said, wow, we're really onto something here?
Yeah, I guess I would go to the concept of process. Being an ex-computer science guy and sort of a little bit of a math nerd, it's really important to me to be able to reproduce success and reproduce happy customers and results. And it was sort of towards the beginning of the ADU adventure for us that it really occurred to me that process is what was going to allow us to just consistently deliver really high quality results. And as soon as we made that shift, we really saw change within our company. It was a
Yeah.
very, very exciting shift to make.
Yeah, that's fantastic. And
Yeah.
Stan, I'm curious to pick your brain a little bit in your experience. Do you tend to hear any common misconceptions or things that people think are true, which isn't necessarily accurate?
There's a lot of misconception out there, and it's driven by incomplete information. There's a lot of question about how much does an ADU cost, and you can quote that a bunch of different ways. You can think about that as just the box, or the box and the foundation, or the box and the foundation and the design, or the box and the foundation, the design and the permitting, or the site work, or there's just sort of a million places you can cut that off. And there's a lot of information out there that leads people to believe that an ADU is $100,000. Well, it's just very, very difficult for consumers to really accurately understand how much an ADU costs. And then once you do have that information, what is it that you're actually getting for that information? Because there's a really wide variety of quality of ADUs, all the way from sort of mobile home level quality to your traditional build. And so I, it's really hard for consumers to make that judgment and understand what they're actually getting into.
I'm curious, as you were talking about that, it kind of got my brain going and, honest and transparency, doing a little prep for the call, right? I'm thinking, what is the difference between an ADU and a tiny home? Because tiny homes are all the buzz, there's TV shows about them, all of that. What's the difference between an ADU and a tiny home? Or are they one and
Yeah, the definition of an ADU is pretty much legislated. It's very clear. We know what an ADU is. We know what an ADU isn't. A tiny home is a little bit more of a colloquial term. So it is not as clearly defined. Some people call ADUs tiny homes. Some people call tiny homes that which could sit on a trailer and be towed behind a truck. So because there isn't really legislation around tiny homes, the definition of them is really kind of vague, and it spans the gamut. But from a practical standpoint, I would say that an ADU is a home. It is on a foundation. It is a legitimate structure. A tiny home may or may not be that. It's difficult just from hearing, "Oh, we do tiny homes," to really understand that. Some people get permits for tiny homes. Some tiny homes don't require a permit. It's really vague.
interesting? I'm glad I asked that question because I was thinking about that. That's interesting. Okay, great.
Yeah, yeah.
Well, Stan, as we start to wrap up this conversation, is there anything that you want to leave our listeners with, whether it be advice, whether it be, a little bit more about Acton ADU, about the industry, anything you want to leave our listeners with?
So I guess the advice that I would give people would be, if you're seriously considering building an ADU, before you call anybody, take a little time to write down the why as to why you're doing this and understand what problems it's solving. Because it's going to put you in a much better position to evaluate the people that you talk to. As some examples, if you're really looking for just short-term cash flow and you want to get it in as quickly as you can and have cash flow come in as quickly as you can, you're going to be buying a very different ADU than if what you want is a long-term asset that's going to appreciate, it's going to provide value for you or your family or your pocketbook for the long term. And there's no right and wrong answer to that, right? Understanding your needs, and then finding somebody that you can work with that will really take the time to understand those needs. That's something that we're really proud of, is we certainly aren't in a position to take every project that comes our way. And we take a lot of time in asking questions and listening and understanding before we give any kind of advice. And that's something I'm very proud of. That's a piece of the culture that I have worked a long time to instill. Because there's a lot of work out there, and there's a lot of contractors out there, and the best case is that the two are very well aligned. That's the best probability of really getting a great result.
That's fantastic. Well, Stan, if people wanted to learn more and maybe reach out to Acton ADU to pursue, a project, where would they go to learn more?
ActonADU.com, ActonADU.com is our website, and we just revamped it, and so I think it's pretty slick now, and there's a lot of really good examples of what we do there. And there's some places that you can click on, some links to set up a call with us. And Kelsey, I really appreciate the opportunity to sort of share this with the world. So thanks for setting this up.
This is fantastic, Stan. Great to have you on the show. I really appreciate you taking the time to talk about, the growth of Acton ADU and, your growth in the industry as well. So thank you for taking the time to be on Business Ninjas.
Thanks very much. Take care. Have a great weekend.
Great to have you.